Ever wondered what happens when unmarried couples who've been building a life together decide to call it quits? Who gets the house, the car, maybe even that vintage record collection they've been building together?
Yeah, it's a question that I think more people are going to need to know the answer to than you might think.
Well, today's deep dive throws us right into this complicated intersection of love and law.
Where those two things meet.
That's right. We're talking Kerr v. Baranow, a 2011 Canadian Supreme Court case that really kind of shook things up when it comes to this area of law.
Oh, absolutely. Set precedents that we still really need to know, especially if you're in one of those committed relationships, but haven't actually gone through the whole marriage process.
Because this isn't just some like dusty old legal case, right? This is about real people with real lives and, all those unspoken things that kind of go on in a long-term relationship.
Absolutely. And Curvy Bear now, like you said, it gave us a new framework to untangle these situations.
Yeah.
So how do judges decide who gets what when an unmarried couple breaks up, especially when you don't have a contract or anything?
Oh.
Well, Curvy Bear now kind of laid the groundwork.
Because, let's be honest, when you're first starting out, falling head over heels, no one's sitting down with a lawyer like, let's just get this sorted out just in case things go south.
Just in case this love doesn't last forever.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's the last thing on your mind.
Exactly. So, okay, we've got two separate appeals that are at play in this case, Kerr and Vanessa. They both involve these unmarried couples that are grappling with property division after a breakup, but the details are really different.
Oh, yeah.
So let's unpack this a little bit. First up, Kerr, what was happening there?
So in Kerr, you're talking about a couple in their late 60s who had been together for over 25 years.
Wow.
They both worked. They contributed to the household in different ways.
Yeah.
But they kept their finances mostly separate. And so when they split up, one of the parties argued that they were entitled to a share of the property. They're claiming things like unjust enrichment and a common intention resulting trust. Basically arguing that they intended to share the ownership all along, even if it wasn't specifically laid out.
So 25 years together, and then suddenly it's like, what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine.
Essentially, that's a great way to put it.
Okay. So contrast that with Vanessa.
So Vanessa is a little bit different.
Okay.
You've got a 12-year relationship, they've got 2 kids, and there's significant financial success that comes out of this relationship. But a lot of that success stemmed from the husband's business.
Okay.
And so the question here is, should the other partner, even though their contributions weren't directly related to the business, should they get a piece of that pie?
Right, because that's a question that I think a lot of couples grapple with, right? This idea of, what's a financial contribution versus all the other ways that you contribute to a life together?
How do you quantify that is the question.
Right, exactly. So how did the Supreme Court, how did they tackle these two really different situations?
Well, before Curvy Baranow, judges use this concept of, it's a mouthful, a common intention resulting trust,
Okay.
to kind of suss out these disputes.
Okay.
And it basically hinged on proving that both people intended to share the ownership, even if legally the titles and all that said otherwise.
So even if on paper it's not sort of officially theirs, this common intention.
Right. It's the are we or aren't we of property division.
Okay. Seems straightforward enough. Why did the court decide to move away from that approach?
Well, on the surface, it did seem pretty straightforward.
Okay.
It made sense, right?
Yeah.
But it caused some problems in practice. For one, it focused too much on what the person giving the property intended, not necessarily the couple as a unit.
Right. Okay.
So you're missing part of the picture.
And you kind of need both sides of the story in a relationship, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this common intention thing just didn't really fit well in situations where contributions weren't directly related to, like, buying a house or investing in a business.
Okay.
So things like, raising kids, emotional support, all the things that go on behind the scenes that allow the other partner to maybe focus on their career.
Right. The kind of the unsung things, the unseen things that don't necessarily have a dollar value attached to them.
Exactly. The old approach didn't really know what to do with that.
Okay, so you're saying it's about recognizing all of those contributions, regardless of whether there's like a clear financial transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they decided to move to a more, modern, flexible tool, which is this concept of unjust enrichment.
Okay, unjust enrichment. That sounds kind of intimidating.
It does.
What does that actually mean?
It just means that one person's unfairly benefiting from something at the expense of another person. And what's great about unjust enrichment is it's flexible. It lets the courts look at the realities of relationships today, where contributions come in all forms. It's not always financial.
So it's not so much, okay, you paid this, you paid that. It's more about the totality of what each person brought to the table to the relationship.
Exactly, exactly. Looking at the big picture, who contributed what to this relationship,
Yeah.
and then how do we make things fair?
Okay, so the Supreme Court, they provided some guidance on this new approach. First up, how do you figure out if a court does decide that compensation is needed? How do you decide how much that should be? Because that seems like a really hard thing to figure out.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Uh,
It can get complicated.
yeah.
Thankfully, they didn't create some sort of rigid formula. You have to calculate this, you have
Well,
to.
an hourly rate for every time you did the dishes or something.
Right, exactly. Can you imagine, here's my emotional support invoice for the last 10 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Talk about sucking all the joy out of it.
Right. What they did, though, is they recognized that a lot of relationships, especially ones that have lasted a long time, are more like joint ventures.
Okay.
Both partners, they contribute in their own unique way, and it's all valuable
Mm.
to their shared resources, to their wealth.
So it's less like you're an employer and this is your employee. It's more like you're partners in this.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You're in this together.
Yeah.
But it gets a little bit more interesting because the second area that they clarified focuses on these mutual benefits that happen.
Hold on, because how do you, when you're deciding whether someone was unjustly enriched, and you said we're looking at this as a joint venture now, aren't all benefits kind of mutual at that point?
Well, it can get complicated. And so what the court said, essentially, is let's not get bogged down in the details of who made dinner how many times or who took out the trash or anything.
Huh.
Instead, we're going to say that the mutual benefits should be considered at the remedy stage, not at the initial was there unjust enrichment stage.
So you first figure out, was there actually, did someone kind of walk away with more than they should have? And then you look at these other little things.
Exactly, to make sure that the remedy is fair.
Okay, I understand that. The third thing then, the third area they clarified was this idea of reasonable expectations, which, it seems like that could get really subjective. So how much weight should courts actually give to what a couple expected or maybe should have expected based on their, individual situation?
And you're right, expectations can be tricky.
Yeah.
What the court said is reasonable expectations matter the most when a court's trying to decide if there's a justifiable reason to actually deny compensation.
Okay.
So, for example, did the couple have an understanding, maybe unspoken, about how finances would be handled in their relationship? Were they intentionally keeping things separate, or were they operating as more of a unit?
So almost like an unspoken prenuptial agreement, even though it's not actually an official legal document.
Yeah, it's similar to that, but remember, this is about more than just finances, right?
Right.
This is about really trying to get at the heart of what this couple's true intention was.
Okay.
Do they want to be partners, or do they want to keep certain aspects of their lives very separate?
So again, it's about actions speaking louder than words. It doesn't really matter what you say you are, it's how you're actually behaving.
Yeah. How did you structure your life together?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. To understand how all of this actually plays out in real life, we need to look at this concept that the court really highlighted, the joint family venture.
This is where it gets really interesting. So the court acknowledged that a lot of unmarried couples, like we see in Kerr and Vanass, they actually operate as what's called a joint family venture. So it's kind of like a business partnership.
Okay.
But instead of focusing on profits, you're focused on building a life together.
Okay, I like that. So how do we know if a couple is approaching their relationship like a joint family venture? What are we looking for here? It's got to be more than just sharing like a Netflix password, right?
Right. It's more than just sharing your streaming services. It goes a lot deeper than that. So the court had a few factors that judges should look at. Did the couple work towards shared goals together, like buying a home, supporting each other's careers? Did they maybe put their own career on hold so their partner could pursue a big opportunity?
Yeah, those are big life decisions to make, especially when you're impacting not just yourself, but your partner too.
Exactly. And the court recognized that, right?
Okay.
They also looked at whether the couple pooled their resources together. Maybe they had a joint bank account. Maybe they made big financial decisions together.
So it's not even just about how much money, but how you're approaching the finances?
Exactly. Are you doing this together or are you keeping it separate? And then another factor is, did they prioritize their family's well-being as a unit? So, did someone put their career on hold so they could raise children? Or maybe support their partner's career ambitions?
Right, because those are the kinds of things that, if you're looking back and deciding, okay, how do we divide things fairly, we want to make sure that those sacrifices are recognized, especially because they do have a very real impact on long-term financial security and all that.
Right, you're giving up something, and the court wanted to make sure that that sacrifice is recognized.
Right, okay.
And even though they said that these are all really helpful factors to consider, the ultimate question is still, what was the intention of this couple?
Okay.
Did they want to create this partnership even though they didn't sign a marriage license? Or was it more, this is my stuff, this is your stuff?
So again, actions speak louder than words in this case.
Exactly. How did you live your life? How did you act?
Okay, so let's bring this joint family venture idea back to the two cases that we're looking at. So first up, Vanassi. And just as a reminder, this is the couple that was together for 12 years. They had children. He had a lot of success in business.
Right.
So did the court find that a joint family venture existed there?
They did. Now, they didn't specifically use that term joint family venture,
Okay.
but they did find that there was one. They acknowledged that the wife, in that case, she made a lot of sacrifices, especially after they had their kids, right?
Yeah.
She stayed home. She took care of the kids. She made sure that everything was running smoothly so that the husband could focus on building his business.
So she was really like the support system that enabled him to do that.
Exactly. Exactly. And so ultimately what happened is they decided that he was unjustly enriched because he had a lot more of the wealth at the end,
Right.
even though they were both in this together, so to speak.
Right. They were a team.
Yeah. So she ended up getting a significant portion of the increase in his net worth from the time that they were together, of course.
Okay.
They, of course, excluded things like the family home because she already had an interest in that.
Right.
But yeah, she was compensated.
So a win for recognizing those contributions, even if they weren't always, directly bringing in the money.
Right. Now, if we look at Kerr, this is where it gets a little different. So remember, Kerr was together for much longer.
Way longer, yeah.
For 25 years, right. But they kept their finances mostly separate.
Okay.
And so in that case, the Supreme Court actually sent it back for a new trial
Oh, wow.
because they didn't think that the original judge had properly considered whether this joint family venture existed.
Just because they kept their finances separate doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't this sense of partnership.
Exactly. They said you need to look deeper.
Yeah.
What was the intention? How did they structure their lives? What were their goals? We need more information.
Interesting. Okay. So we've got two very different situations, both unmarried couples dealing with property division. It seems like what we're really getting at is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach here.
Yeah, you can't just stamp unmarried couple and say, here's the formula.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
We have to look at everyone's specific situation.
So what Curvy Baranow really did is it forced the courts to look beyond those very rigid categories we used to have.
Yeah, we're not just going to look at your marital status. We're going to look at the dynamics of your relationship and acknowledge that there are lots of different ways, equally valid ways, to contribute to a life together.
Which I think is really important because relationships look different today than they did maybe even a generation ago.
Oh, absolutely.
And that idea of what constitutes a family has really, broadened as well.
Right. Family doesn't have to be this very narrow definition anymore. And so it makes you think, right?
It does.
That makes you think, how should the law adapt to recognize these modern relationships?
That's a big question, and I don't know if there's an easy answer. But I do think Curvy Baranow, regardless, really compels us to look beyond these traditional labels that we put on people and really examine what's the substance of this relationship.
Yes, exactly.
How are these people actually sharing their lives, their resources, their goals, their dreams? And how can we recognize that, even if there isn't necessarily a contract or a ceremony to formalize it?
That's beautifully put. And speaking of recognizing contributions, even if there's not this formal agreement,
does this whole joint family venture thing, does it kind of blur the lines then between marriage and common law relationships? Like, should the law treat them the same way?
well, that's the million-dollar question, is that?
Right.
And it's something that legal experts are, still kind of debating.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, you've got marriage, right? And that's a very distinct legal institution.
Right.
Comes with its own set of rights and responsibilities.
Yeah.
Things that you're choosing to enter into.
Right.
But then, like we see in Kerr v. Baranow, a lot of unmarried couples, they're building lives that look a lot like what we traditionally think of as a marriage.
Yeah.
You've got long-term commitment. You've got intertwined finances. They're sharing their lives.
And like we were saying, the court put a lot of emphasis on the intention. Like, what were the goals? How did they actually structure their lives together, regardless of what their official relationship status was?
Exactly. And just because they chose not to get married doesn't automatically mean that they intended to keep everything separate or that their contributions are somehow less valuable.
Right, exactly. And it kind of brings us to this bigger question of, how do we define family and partnership in this day and age? Is it just about, these legal documents, or should the law take those lived experiences into account a bit more?
It's the age-old question, right? What does family really mean?
Right.
And I don't think Kerr v. Baranow necessarily gave us all the answers,
Yeah.
but it definitely got those wheels turning. It made people in the legal world really think about how should the law evolve to better reflect what's happening, in relationships today.
It's almost like a good reminder that, whether you're married, common law, whatever your situation is, how you structure that relationship really matters. You need to communicate, be intentional with your choices, and remember that those everyday things that you do, those contributions, even the ones that people might not see, they do have value.
Yeah, they matter in life, and they matter in the eyes of the law.
Well, there you have it. That was our deep dive into Kerr v. Baranow.
Fascinating case.
Really interesting stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.